Tomorrow, the Supreme Court is set to hear oral arguments in a voting rights case that is pitting Republican against Republican. In an unusual case of inter-party warfare, the case Watson versus Republican National Committee challenges a Mississippi law that allows for a grace period for election officials to count ballots postmarked by Election Day, but arriving up to 5 business days later. Mississippi Republican Secretary of State Michael Watson and Attorney General Lynn Fitch, whose case pushed the Dobbs case that overturned Roe, are defending Mississippi's law, which passed Mississippi's Republican supermajority legislature by a vote of 118 yeas to 1 lone dissent. But will the people be damned, at least when it comes to this RNC, backed by the White House and Justice Department, who argue that ballots must be received before the end of Election Day to be counted. Joining us to break down this court case is James Sample, professor of law at Hofstra University. So, James, this to me is fascinating just because you have a true clash of federalism.
Absolutely. I mean, federalism with respect to voting rights and elections is nothing new. I mean, there was a long push for many, many years in the South for states' rights, and that was met with the 15th Amendment. It was met with the Voting Rights Act. Here, many of those same constituencies are on the opposite side because they want to do away with a rule that the federal government has never rejected and that the states have chosen, but that they perceive to be politically unfavorable. And the question here is whether or not Mississippi and 14 other states, and then there are an additional 14 or 15 states, depending on how you keep score, that have a slightly lesser version of the same rule, whether they are allowed to treat ballots that are postmarked by Election Day but received thereafter as valid. Mississippi says the answer to that is yes. The Fifth Circuit, for the first time in American history, the first court to ever strike down this kind of provision. Who were the appointees on that panel? All 3 were appointed by Donald Trump.
So we were talking about this during the break. I am the daughter of a very long line of accountants. It has been drilled into me that I can send in my tax return on April 15th or whatever tax day is in a particular year, as long as it is postmarked that day. Why are tax returns treated any differently than ballots?
Historically, they haven't been in the sense, and at the federal government level, I mean, there's a reason that many post offices stay open until midnight on April 15th, and it's exactly what you're saying. The federal government is perfectly happy to take your money as long as you, and they'll take your money without a penalty for paying late if you file at 11:59 and you get that postmark in person at your post office. If you drop it off in a mailbox that is going to be picked up on April 15th. There's even an extra USPS +2 grace period for Postal Service postmarks where the Postal Service believes it is credible that you've dropped it off in time. But the idea here, and especially in an era where the Postal Service has been subjected to a level of political manipulation, the idea here is simple. That voters who cast their ballot in states that have chosen to allow ballots to be received after Election Day and still count are now subjected to third parties, the Postal Service, and matters that are out of their control as to whether or not their ballot will count.
What is the argument that is being made against receiving ballots that are postmarked on the day of the election? I mean, does it come down to the demographics of who's voting? Because when you kind of take that with what is happening with the SAVE Act and people who are concerned about voter oppression in this country, they look at it in the totality of everything that is happening, the culture that is emerging of trying to oppress the votes of people. And it's being driven by the Republican Party. And so there's like the legal argument and then the political argument. So I'm asking you, what is the legal argument that they're making? Because the political argument is very obvious to everybody who sees it, which is the belief that mail-in votes are democratic, and so they want to oppress those votes. Same with the SAVE Act, is that if you can oppress votes coming from the base of the Democratic Party, you will favor Republican voters in the outcome of those elections. But what's the legal argument?
Well said, and it's worth clarifying one aspect of the political component, which is that before Donald Trump,
yes,
historically,
exactly. Yeah, right.
mail-in voting heavily favored the Republican Party. But he has such a hatred of mail-in voting, and he has encouraged people not to do it, that has flipped. But on the legal front, the argument is that it creates delays, that it creates chaos and a lack of clarity because we sometimes have to wait. There's the legal argument is that the federal government sets Election Day as the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November. That's true, but for 150 years, we've had those congressional statutes in place. And for 150 years, until this Fifth Circuit ruling, no court had ever ruled that Election Day can't mean the day on which you cast the ballot, even if it is counted later, the latter being a ministerial thing. So the argument that they're making, the challengers here are making, and that the Fifth Circuit did embrace, is that the clarity of the bright line rule that everything stops when Election Day, that Tuesday, is over, and no ballots that arrive thereafter, provides a kind of bright line clarity.
There's nothing in the Constitution that says the results have to be on Election Day. Election Day is Election Day, but the results can be the day after or 2 days after. So
it's not very often that I quote James Madison and Brett Kavanaugh as agreeing. But here's James Madison in 1787. It is necessary to leave regulation of federal elections in the first instance to the states because they are closest to the people. Then in 2020, dealing with a pandemic-related matter out of Wisconsin, Brett Kavanaugh said, quote, "The variation in state responses reflects our constitutional system of federalism. Different state legislatures may make different choices." James Madison and Brett Kavanaugh, separated by a couple hundred years and a whole lot of ideology, same page.
And also, like in the 18th century, didn't it take them a long time to count the ballots? They didn't have the same ballot technology, the voting machine technology that we have today.
Do you have any predictions? Given that Kavanaugh statement, it makes me think that Watson might prevail tomorrow.
It's a hard question. I'm always reluctant to speculate. I will say that I think that this court will be this court is pretty extreme. That being said, this would be quite an upheaval. It would be deeply inconsistent with longstanding precedent. And to your initial question, Elise, it would cut against federalism. Congress is well aware that states count ballots received after Election Day in states that have made that choice. Congress has revisited election-related statutes many times, including in 2022, after the debacle of 2020. Congress has never chosen to weigh in and ban states from doing this. I think the court will consider that persuasive.
Can you give us quickly a sense of how catastrophic this would be? I just want to bring it back down to earth for people at home. Just like, as Eamon pointed out, these things are all interconnected. Yeah. More than a decade ago, Kansas passed a law very similar to the SAVE Act. In that state alone, which is a relatively small population, it meant that tens of thousands of people who were eligible to vote were not able to participate in that cycle. There were lawsuits over it. Court struck it down. And now here we are. If you multiply what happened in Kansas, and this is just about the SAVE Act, yeah, state after state after state, you would be looking at millions of people otherwise eligible to vote barred from participation. Then you add what may happen here with mail-in ballots. What would that mean for the midterms?
If the Save America Act were to pass, and I do not believe it will, that would be catastrophic. This is not on that scale, but as you point out, the byproduct, if you multiply them, you put them together, the sum of both of them would be significant. And even if the Save America Act does not pass, which it should not because of exactly what you say, and the scale, 29 million people do not have the citizenship-proving documents who are citizens, passports or original birth certificates readily available. That's what the Save America Act is about. They market it as voter ID. It is a show your papers to register to vote bill. This is not on that scale, but 30% of the American people in 2024 did vote by mail.
I am always surprised that we don't hear more people saying the show your papers line. Republicans have done a very good job of making it sound like, what's the big idea? Bring your license with you.
I mean, the Democrats should be out there every day, show your papers. We're going to be living in a society where you have to walk around, show your papers.
Yeah.
We're already there, sort of.
James Sample, thank you as always. Great to have you.